3 chapters left, and we have 3 days left. How's that sound? And it's pretty clear that today is the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus. Next week is the resurrection. And then the third week will be the time that Jesus spends with his disciples. And particularly, he spends with his disciples. And then, of course, there's the Ascension. The only 2 books that have the Ascension is the book of Acts and Luke. Are we okay, ladies?
Report. This is too much with others. Like we used to get some report cards when we go to work.
I've always had that.
All right. And this is the epitome of the humility of Christ and his passion. You go to we really need to start with chapter 18, verse 38 through 41st, because I think we need to get the feeling of Pilate, and it reoccurs several times. Pilate will state that Jesus is innocent at least 3 times. All right? And John makes that very clear. So heading into the actual condemnation and crucifixion, sentencing of Jesus, it's very important. This whole what is truth, I wish I could have a better angle on where Pilate was at, because if you read the material, people are all over the place as to, and we discussed this last week, where Pilate was when he says what is truth. And we can all have different opinions. And I wish I was there. And sometimes you try to figure out where the context is, what is John trying to say. If there's one thing that I can get with, because John's writing this, right? So what's on John's mind when he says that what is truth was said? And I would suggest to you the only way that John heard this information would have to have been by the resurrected Christ afterwards, because John wasn't there in that area, right? You ever think about that?
Where?
When Pilate said, "What is truth?" It's just him and Jesus. John's not close.
Well, John was with him when they went to the father-in-law's home, John and Peter, because one of the Gospels says that John was able to get in because he had
Correct.
higher standing. So you don't think he went on?
No, I don't think John's here. I think he can only hear this from Jesus. Remember, Jesus spent 40 days with his disciples after the resurrection. They hadn't had these discussions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, where does he get this information? I can understand where Luke gets his information, because it wasn't there, because he was the reporter. So I would suggest a lot of the information comes from Mary and people who just like if you were trying to get information about an event that happens over here, let's say in Indianapolis, if you would travel to Indianapolis and you would talk to the people who were there, right? So a lot of this internal stuff I would suggest was John after the resurrection, where Jesus said, "This is what happens," and it's in his gospel. Otherwise, he's making it up, and we know that that's not true, right? So he's putting this information down. Oh, wouldn't it have been wonderful? I mean, if you were in a time capsule, if you were in a time machine, where would you go if you had, like, say, 3 choices? Would you rather, let me ask you this, would you rather go to watch the resurrection happen, which nobody watched, or would you want to be part of the crowd that was talking to the resurrected Jesus afterwards? That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Afterwards. Yeah. To hear what it is that Jesus would have said as the resurrected Christ, because first you have to get over the fact, and if you listen to the accounts of the resurrection, you're alive. Yeah, I told you I was going to be resurrected. Yeah, but no. I had a hard time believing it, but now I see you. You are actually virgin birth is who? Mary. The only living by sight. Yeah, Joseph. I would suggest Joseph had lived by faith more than anybody. Right? Right. See what I'm saying? So, yeah, just and I would go there, and I would also go to the road to Emmaus. The road to Emmaus. We'll get to that. Actually, that's not in this gospel, is it? Or is it? No. Anyway, I won't go there because we got to get to the text. But here, what is truth? And then the point, though, is I think the only thing that I can understand here is that John is getting to the point that he's making the point that Pilate knows that. Finish the sentence. He's not guilty. Yeah. And John makes the point. Pilate knows it. So he's in a dilemma. And the sad thing is, he's willing to give up Jesus for his own skin, his own political position. Yeah.
I think one of the things we have to fear most is someone who is in a position of power who does not have the backbone to stand up for what is right.
Right, and the best interest for those who he has power over. Right? Isn't that interesting? Because the one who has the greatest power is God, and what is his best interest for the people he has his power, which is us. And what does he do? Completely different than what Pilate's going to do, right? That's the beauty of the gospel. Those are the areas in which when you contemplate the gospel and you actually go there, and then you compare it to our reality in this world, what do people do with power? And they corrupt it. And then you look at Jesus. What does Jesus do with ultimate power, the very power that created the universe? And then the fact that the gospel is such that he dies for us. He becomes the greatest servant. All right? So just compare that. This is what proves the gospel. Compare God serving corrupt humanity in order to make it right again to any human being that has power over other people, and all the many ways in which you can see how people have power over other people, whether it's somebody as a magistrate over the people, or a rapist over his victim, or whatever. Any power over a person and what they do with it. They become self-centered and they want to get whatever it is they're trying to get, right? Power, whatever. But God, in his authority and his power, does this, right? So you step back and you say, let's pretend these are just two fantasies that exist. Right? These who do the power, who power corrupts absolutely, and then you have this document that's substantiated with the Old Testament, but in the whole document itself, it's depicting a God that in his power ends up on a cross. What do you do with that? Even if you didn't believe it. Even if you didn't believe in Jesus and you compared Jesus and his authority on the cross and all the ways in which humanity uses power, what would you conclude? Even if it was a fairy tale.
I would think weakness.
See it?
From a human perspective, I really go, look how weak he is. He's weak and he puts himself on a cross, but what does that do for us?
Well, they kept telling him to come down and here.
Right. I mean, I just look at him as a weak individual who was hopeless.
Really?
From a worldly perspective, who
No, I want you to think about it. Compare, okay, you have that going on over here in power, and you have all the examples of power that you have going on over here. And those stories are being told.
So not from a, so how do you want me to do it?
Look at both stories. The story of the fact that in the gospel, what's being told to you, what's being proclaimed to you is God saves you by himself going to a cross. In his power, in his authority. Okay. And then you look at humanity and all the examples of humanity in their power doing what they do in their power, whether it's governments or individuals.
From an unbeliever's
From
perspective,
an unbeliever's perspective.
I would say weakness too. Yeah, that accomplished
I would
nothing.
say,
Accomplished nothing. He died on a cross. He accomplished nothing. That was really weak. That's the
Okay, what if you were looking at the story and saying, but the story says that in his weakness he, again, you don't believe it. Let's say it's a Santa Claus.
But if we don't believe it, then we see foolishness.
Can you get past the merit of it? Can you get past the merit that story says that somebody in his divinity and power actually does that for someone he loves? Can you get past that?
well, if I look at it,
They're assuming, though.
I'm not explaining myself right.
I think what I'm seeing here is, as a disbeliever, if I'm looking at these two, I'm looking at the reality of humanity, and then I'm looking at this fairy tale, and I'm thinking to myself, who would write that? That's just backwards. That's not how you would write the Savior comes to save you.
Right.
So it has to have some merit of being true, because
Well, how about this?
It has to make the non-believer think,
It has to.
yeah.
or else he's not of sound mind.
Yes.
Well, there are some of those.
Well, okay,
But they're not all unbelievers.
let me put it this way. When I learned that my parents were not telling the truth to me about Santa Claus, remember that awful day for all of you whose parents told you about Santa Claus?
Yeah.
All right?
Was it usually your parents or was it the kids on the playground?
Both. Well, no, my parents.
Yeah. You confirmed it with the parents.
It was not absolute to your parents.
Right. But disregard all of that. If Santa Claus were true, compared to the world, then
I mean, I think that's why people like the story of Santa Claus, because he's this altruistic, supposedly always good person
Good always.
that comes and does this great thing for people. No one does it once a year, but
right.
that he brings all these gifts and stuff. So they want to believe in him. So we perpetuate this story.
Right.
I mean, we wouldn't tell it every year if it was a story about some guy who came and put coal in stockings every year. Because he does this. People who talk about Santa Claus and not Jesus at Christmas, the things they emphasize are he's kind, he's good, he's giving.
Right. I don't think I'm necessarily explaining myself correctly, and forgive me for this, but it's here's a story being told here about God who becomes the ultimate sacrifice as God, the authority. All right. And then you have examples of people in their authority all over the place in our experience that paints a whole different story. All right. Now, regardless of whether it's true or not, doesn't that shine beautiful light as opposed to this?
Oh, yeah.
If it were true. Okay.
Only when the resurrection happens.
No. Just that in itself.
The whole story.
Oh, I see what
Right,
you're saying.
yeah,
If
see,
it's a positive story
Well,
versus a
right,
negative.
exactly. If that be true. All right.
There
So-
was merit to a man who was willing to give up his life for something that he believed in.
Like a soldier.
for his people, where earthly government officials wouldn't give their life up for their people.
Right. So
Jesus is giving his life for his people
right.
as a king.
So what's more true? I mean, if somebody were to do what Jesus does, that would be awesome in his authority. If another human being over here, if one of us would do the same thing that Jesus does in this fairy tale called Christianity, that would be what? Awesome. Okay? So we have this fairy tale of Jesus. Yeah, right. Someone in his authority doing that. And God in his authority doing that. Okay? But if our government, the United States government, all those involved in the United States government would do the exact same thing that Jesus did for the people of America, then it would be what?
Wonderful.
It would be wonderful and awesome. So the merit of what Jesus does, whether it's true or not, is still a merit that is far beyond what you and I do.
Yeah.
Right? And you know that to be true. Whether it is or isn't, but that would be awesome, right? So the gospel says this is true. Alright? Do you dare to believe it? Is almost the case. Right? And John, in the end, and we're going to hear it, John's going to say, when they pierced his side, and the blood and the water came out, and it was indication that he was dead, John goes, I'm telling you, I saw it. I'm your witness. I saw it. So that you may believe it's true. That it's not a fairy tale. See? And it's not a big stretch then to say, wow, I already know if it is a fairy tale, it would be what? Wonderful. But if it's true, and God really is like this, then everything about virtue and honesty and truth would be true. If it's not true, then what? Virtue, honesty, and truth doesn't exist. See what I mean? And so you find yourself in places, I'm either going to be a nihilist and have no hope. A nihilist who has no hope. Or what? This must be true. That's what the gospel does. And anybody who would take the story of the gospel and then try to live and understand that life is compromised between a nihilist who says there's no truth and this. Anybody living in between that and trying to live in between that, they're the most to be pitied. They're the most to be pitied. You're going to either conclude, and that's what C.S. Lewis says, you either conclude that Jesus is a nut job or he's the Son of God. And the gospel will bring you there. So you're either one or the other. Here, I have more respect for the nihilist than I do for the lukewarm individual that won't make a decision regardless to what truth is. Does that make sense? John does that here. Because what we have is Jesus, or Pilate is like, he's not going to come to those conclusions. But you can almost sense that Pilate's like, he's innocent, and I'm going to do everything I can do to convince you, the mob, that he's innocent to no avail. Alright? So he says, what is truth? And I almost sense that that's almost part of this whole thing. I find no basis for a charge against him, but then he goes into, let's try to politically get this thing, let's do this custom about releasing somebody, right? And then we get to chapter 19. Pilate took Jesus, had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail King of Jews. They mocked him, and they struck him in the face. Now there are two ideas here. Mel Gibson, in his movie, had one idea. I don't agree with this. Is one area I don't agree with Mel Gibson, and that is when they went and had. There are three types of flogging. Okay, and I'm just going to give you the terms. There's three types of flogging that happen by the Romans. One of them is called fustigatio, which is a light beating for hooligans, and those people just had to get straightened out. Almost like a cane. If you go to China, people get caned, something like that. It's going to hurt, but you're going to be able to go home. All right? Then there is the flagellatio, which is a brutal flogging. That would be something more severe. If you think about somebody being whipped, flogged, okay? And then there's verbatio. Verbatio was the kind of flogging they did that was so brutal that you could see bones and internal organs when they were finished. And that's the kind where they used the flagrum. And it was a handle with leather cord about that long with pieces of metal on the end, and that's what they would have done with Jesus. They definitely did that with Jesus. The question is when. My suggestion is that he would have had, in the first one, or more likely the second one, the first time, I would suggest he was flogged twice, if you put these things together. And the bottom line is, the first one would have been where Pilate really wanted to release Jesus. And he thought, you know what, from his perspective, as a Roman guy, he doesn't know exactly what's going on here. They brought Jesus because of insurrection, right? That's not what the Sanhedrin tried Jesus on. What did the Sanhedrin try Jesus on?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy. If you're within the religious sect of Judaism, blasphemy is the worst thing that you do. It's saying that you're God. And some kind of equality to God, right? And so when the Sanhedrin got together, that was the thing. The Sanhedrin, when they brought Jesus to Pilate, they knew that Pilate could care less about blasphemy. So they changed the charge to what? Insurrection against Rome. And you're going to find when we read this, if we get to it, he's going, the people are, they're going to go from insurrection back to blasphemy. It's very interesting to watch this. Because in the end, it's going to be where the Sanhedrin says, and you find him innocent, but you got to do this for us. That's what happens. And Pilate's going to have to say, I'm either going to do it for them and lose my job, or what? I'm going to save the guy, because I know he's innocent. That's what's going on there. Okay? I would suggest that Jesus then was flogged at one time, and from Pilate's perspective, he brings Jesus out, and he says, okay, you know what? We just beat him up a bit here. I think after this, his ideas of being a king of some kind of kingdom that is not of this world, he'll simmer down, and you guys go back to normality. Right? Is the crowd happy with that? No. They become more incensed. Okay? And the other thing is the veratio. I got this written down, so I can't remember them. Which is the most terrible scourging of all, and associated with punishments, including crucifixion. So in other words, when people were crucified, this would often happen to them. It would also hasten the death of the person who was crucified. Because, by the way, if you're a soldier trying to crucify people, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to get tired of going back home to the family, right? You want them to die. So this gives you your opportunity to really brutally mess up the guy so that when he ends up on the cross, he's not going to hang there for a couple of days. And you're going to be the one who's going to be responsible for the body. Okay? The other thing. So that would have happened definitely. I would suggest afterwards. But I could be wrong. Okay? But the point I'm making is that Pilate, what? From John's perspective, Pilate wanted to what?
Let him go.
Let him go. He did. He wanted to let him go. And he tried really hard.
But was it for the right reasons?
I would suggest it's kind of like, man, this poor guy, he's innocent. But you know what? I'm Pilate also, and what's going to happen is you'll see that the people say, we have no king but Caesar. We know you're on thin ice with Caesar, and all we have to do is cause a ruckus here, and Pilate, you're done. And Pilate knows that, so that's the decision he has to make.
Self-preservation.
Yes. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe, Pilate said to them, here is behold the man. All right? This would have been the third time Pilate pronounced innocence, by the way. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him." Now we know from other Gospels that the chief priests and the officials would have coached the crowd. They would have gotten the crowd on their side, saying this is really important that we do this for the preservation of our nation, which, by the way, is being suppressed by the Romans, who all of a sudden we find to be our friends. And we have no king but Caesar, will be their words. Really? I thought he really was upset about Caesar by the way he treats you. Now our best friend is Caesar, the king of Rome, so that we can get rid of the king of heaven.
What does it say about a captive after a while? They become attached to their captor.
The Helsinki.
What's it called?
It's called the Helsinki syndrome.
Helsinki?
Yeah. Or Stockholm, sorry.
Okay.
Wrong day. Stockholm syndrome, yeah.
One of those.
Yeah. I don't think he was in there long enough for that kind of a relationship.
As far as what?
The Stockholm syndrome.
Where it reminded me of that syndrome where someone who is being held captive by somebody, after a while, they sometimes become attached to them.
Oh, yeah. So you're thinking who's being attached to who?
The Jews are attached to Rome because,
No.
you know,
I would no. I would say no, because remember, 1 week before this, the people were hailing him as he rode into Jerusalem. They were convinced. Their authorities were saying, "You got to do this." No, I don't think so. I don't think so. This was a quick turnaround by people.
almost like the devil did it.
Definitely. Yeah. You take him and crucify him. Now, you see how illogical that is? Pilate's losing it. You go and crucify him, number one. They're not allowed to do that. Number two, Jews don't crucify people. You go crucify him. Pilate's losing it here. You take him. As for me, I find no basis for charges against him. And what did the Jews? Listen, the Jews insisted. Now here's the translation. Now watch. Okay, insurrection is not working. Pilate finds no threat in Jesus. He's not an insurrectionist. He's not going to overthrow Rome, whatever he does, right? So what do the Jews go? Oh shoot, this isn't working. So here we go. Watch. We have a law. What does Pilate care about their law? Rome is the law. If you have a law within Rome that exists within Jews, within your religiosity, does Pilate even care about that? No. And now what are they doing? They're actually bringing back the charge of blasphemy to Pilate. So, you tell me, what does Pilate care about blasphemy?
The only thing he cares is the crowd needs to be happy, but he doesn't care about blasphemy.
But as far as the question goes, what does Pilate care about blasphemy? Everybody?
Because he's
Nothing.
saying he's a king, and
Nothing.
that overrules Caesar,
Yeah.
Nothing.
and that's where he would come into play with it.
That's different. That's insurrection.
Right.
That's the point. Pilate would be concerned about any kind of plot against Rome. But he doesn't care about their law, about blasphemy. All right? But they return to it. Right?
Didn't some of the Caesars view themselves as divine?
Yes.
So a blasphemy would be setting yourself up directly against Caesar.
That's not, no, there's a distinction being made here. Pilate wants to know if he's a threat to Rome. So from Pilate's perspective, they're within their law about being the king of the Jews would not have meant anything to him, unless it would be part of like the zealots who say our kingdom is of God, and therefore, we're going to overthrow Rome because that's God's desire. That's different. But he already sees from talking to Jesus, there's no threat there. Jesus doesn't want to do that. Does that make sense? So it's very interesting that it's like they're unraveling and going back to not what they're basically doing is going back to Pilate. We're gonna torment you now. If you don't do what we want, we're gonna what? We're gonna make it hard for you to keep your position. Right? And according to our law, not Roman law, but our law, which law? Well, blasphemy. Go back to the law of God in the Pentateuch, and what do you find? If you think you're God, you should die. Right? Our law says he must die because he claims to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Why? Because he's more afraid. And he went back inside to the palace.
I believe he thinks it could have been true.
I think he thinks both ways. I think he seriously thinks there's something about this guy. There's something, he's not sure. Maybe there is some truth here. Maybe if he is the Son of God, then I'm going to hell. Or then he thinks on the other side, if I don't crucify him because I'm fear that he might actually be God, then the Jews will, they'll rise up and I'll lose my job. They might even try to kill me. And if I kill him, then it truly is God, what he says he is, then God's going to, I don't know, put down a lightning bolt and kill him or something.
I think he's afraid of the crowd. He's afraid of how dedicated to crucifixion they are going to be under these circumstances. He didn't go adulterize or something. He's bad. In their eyes, he's really bad.
Yes. I don't think he's thinking about hell or anything. I think it's all about, I understand where you're going with this, and you're going to cause trouble with us. Because now this has to do with your religion. And when it has to do with your religion, you're going to be fervent against it. Yeah. So this is a sign. Okay. So Pilate goes, oh, okay. Now we got these religious fanatics. Now what are you going to do? Well, based on our law, our interpretation of what God would say is this: he must die. In other words, everything I've done so far about trying to suggest that he is harmless has been what?
In vain.
Yes. Then he goes and he talks to Jesus again. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. And that has everything to do with as a sheep before his what was the word? Not shears, but is it shears or shears? He's silent, right? And he didn't open up his mouth. Well, Jesus only opened up his mouth when he was asked a direct question. This time he doesn't say anything. But then watch. You refuse to speak to me? I asked, don't you realize that I have the power to either free you or crucify you? Now, when we're talking about authority of Pilate, now Jesus is going to speak because Pilate needs to be corrected. See that? No, that's not right, Pilate. Now that you're speaking an untruth, I will speak to you. But if you ask me these, I'm going to stay quiet before my shears because I'm willing to die for the sins of the world. But now you say that you have the actual power. No. I'm going to make it clear to you that you're not the one in control here. Who is? My Father is in control. See? And so he'll speak, and he'll say, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. That's got a lot to do with the two kingdoms of God there. I won't go there. I feel like doing it. But it's in other words, God gave him the power to be the authority that he is. All right? That's a whole other subject. But anyway, God gave you the power. God allowed the power for anybody who rules in any kind of government situation, whether it's good or bad. Interesting, isn't it? But who is the ultimate power? God. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin. I love that verse. I have this sense of a little bit of vindication for Pilate, because I feel a little sorry for Pilate. I don't know about you guys. I feel sorry for Pilate. How about you? You feel sorry for Pilate? Maybe not.
He's between a rock and a hard place. I do feel bad for him.
Like you do for any weak person in
Yeah.
a circumstance.
In a
Like
circumstance.
you're not saying that for what's right.
Right.
Right, right.
It's more pity, I think, than feeling
Yeah.
sorry for them.
Yes, okay, good, yeah. Now, who's the one who handed them over?
I don't understand the connection between those two sentences, because the authority, to me, is coming from two places, from God, and then from Rome, from Pilate's perspective.
Right.
But then therefore, he who delivered it, the Jews delivered him over.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't understand the connection of the therefore. That's the part I don't get. I get that the people who have handed the people who have handed Jesus over have a greater sin than the one Pilate's about to commit.
Right.
Okay, I got it.
Well, and that's a great question. I have a comment on that for a long time too. I don't think it comes natural, does it? So why is it that Jesus says, maybe the Sanhedrin is one, but also Judas is the other one, right? Judas handed them over too. They have the greater sin as opposed to Rome. Why is that?
I think for Judas, I think it is a direct reference to Judas. And because Judas was a follower. He was one of the 12. He even received, probably most likely, was there at the Last Supper. He was one of them, but he was, and he betrayed his belief. As opposed to Pilate, who's a Rome, a Gentile. He's not a believer. He's struggling with who Jesus is, and he's never really heard, really he doesn't know the law of the Jews.
No.
Whereas Judas knew everything Jesus did, saw all the signs, and still betrayed him.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Yep. It's a big part of it. In other words, here's the other thing to look at. How much, here's a real dose of the law for all of us. Does that mean God holds us more responsible than an unbeliever in what we do?
Well, wouldn't he?
He should.
Because it says,
He does.
your least favorite verse, where it holds pastors more accountable.
I know.
As Christians, then, should we be held more accountable than people
Yes,
that don't?
yes, because of what you know.
But by golly, when we get you to the Christian side, yeah.
Because we're part of the
Yes,
covenant.
yes, right.
And there's a
So is
responsibility
hiding
to
really
being
deep
part of the
in there?
covenant.
For stupidity. For weakness.
I don't know.
But Pilate also tried to do everything to pacify them and let Jesus go.
Within the power of his position
Yes.
and his role, but not within his power as a man to speak up in the
Do the
situation
right thing.
and to do the right thing,
Yeah,
which is the big parallel to what we face politically.
that's true.
That is good.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Is this that time when I could give you one of my favorite quotes by Dante?
It's infernal.
The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality.
Ooh.
To be highest-minded creatures of God, you have to take a stand.
Yeah.
Well, and Billy Graham said, a man who takes a stand stiffens the spines of others. Those are my two.
Oh, that's very nice.
I'm doing my whole repertoire.
I needed to hear that for sure. I needed to hear that. Thank you. Yeah, okay, good. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, then what? You're not a friend to Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar."
I thought it was interesting that they talk about friend of Caesar. Why would, most people don't think of ourselves as friend of our leader. You're either supporting
title that Pilate should have had as the emperor's closest and most faithful supporters, so they were directly attacking Pilate at that point. He would have been called a friend of Caesar. Pilate would have been, because he was put in that position by Caesar. So that was a direct. He would have understood, I think, in the political climate of the day, if that word got back to Rome, his head would be gone.
Yeah.
So they knew what they were doing.
Yes. Yeah,
To
that's
continue
for
to
sure.
manipulate
Yeah.
Pilate.
They were manipulated.
So is this biblical mafia?
Yeah. 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 The same thing, right?
I think it's similar to today, how maybe not so much here in the United States with a democracy, but in China, they are required to give allegiance to the Chinese government first,
Right.
above any allegiance to anything else,
Including family.
including family. Yeah, they are expected to reject all belief in all gods.
Uh-huh.
And those who don't are sent away to re-education camps until they are willing to admit that that the communist government is the ultimate power, which is basically like a god, which is similar to Babylon too.
Sure.
And you see with Daniel.
Yeah. Good point. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat, the place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation, Passover, about the 6th hour, which would have been right around 9 o'clock, okay? Right around 9 o'clock. Now, others would say he was crucified at 9 o'clock, but okay, so maybe it was 8:50, I don't know. He still has to take his cross and end up over there. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews, but they shouted, take him away, and crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar. I wrote my Bible, and this was like years ago. Vomit material. Vomit material. The fact that they say, we have no king but Caesar. All right, think about it. What kind of Messiah are they looking for? One that would what? Conquer Caesar. And now, in order to get rid of the true king, they show their allegiance to Caesar. Any other day, they would have never said this. Pulling out all the stops. This is nauseating. Right?
And isn't this probably one of the verses that people use when they say the Jews killed Jesus and,
Yes.
Hate the Jews?
Yeah, which is, of course, going too far. Because when somebody does that, then they don't realize that they, just like the Jews, are right, and all of a sudden it becomes a self-righteous thing when you start to say that. Yes. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. It was probably the cross beam of the cross. And you have, right, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because to carry the entire cross would have been a physical impossibility.
And it would be extremely inefficient.
Yes.
I mean, the Romans had an efficient system of punishment and killing.
Exactly. And they would have the vertical beam already taken care of. Another thing with Mel Gibson's movie was great and stuff, but some of those things. He would have probably had just the cross beam to carry. And that would have been heavy enough.
And also that would have made the posts in the ground permanent.
Probably, yeah.
So that all they had to do was bring the
Right.
cross beam,
Right.
and that way they didn't have to put one in.
Yes.
Yeah, and they just pull them up 3 or 6 feet and
Yeah.
lock it in, and there you are.
This always comes to light every year, except this year, for some reason, I got out of it, because I think Pastor Zexer had his son do it. But usually, you see the wooden cross we have over there with the purple on it? humanity. And we carry that thing down, and I'm thinking, this is a small thing, though, comparatively. Yeah.
That's probably about 1/3. To go back just a second, I think part of this with Pilate and the description here of how he believes, ultimately, he believes Jesus is innocent.
Right.
And in the gospel, from the eternal perspective, you can look at that and say, not even mankind's rule said he did this. It was all trumped up.
Yes.
You know, it's just one more statement to how innocent he was, that even the ruler of the day said he was innocent.
Excellent point. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So in the end, you have to realize that God is in control of this.
Yeah.
You know, evil can't even get it right. You would think that the evil. No, I won't go there. Excellent point. Excellent point. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place called the skull, in Aramaic Golgotha. Here they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Now, it's very interesting to me that all the Gospels just basically say they crucified him. Right? Where would you go to find out what that actually means? What's the details of the crucifixion? Where would you go? 2 places I would suggest. Psalm 22, Isaiah 53. And we need to go there. All right? The Gospels just say that they crucified him. And then here's what he said. They don't give us the details. The details are in the Old Testament. Right? So go to Psalm 22. Psalm of David. And if we could spend a little more time, we might not finish here today, but this is really important. I think especially during the time of Lent, if you go to those 2 places, you get the commentary on what's going on. All right? Could somebody read Psalm 22 for me? Just listen to it. Of course, this is a Psalm of David who says these things, going through a very trying time of his life. But then Jesus takes it and what? Gives the trying time its fulfillment. This to me is like me when I had something wrong with my intestines, and it became where my intestine. Every one of our intestines has a rhythm, and it's very important that rhythm happens so you can have bowel movements. Right? Well, what happened to me is the rhythm got wrong, and then it went like this, and I ended up getting all locked up, and I was just moving areas, and it happened, and I was in severe pain. I had more pain than I ever had, and as I got tested for it, I think Carla and I both figured out she was going to be a little at a very early age. And I would, the only thing that would take the pain away is if I went into a hot bath. But as soon as I got out of it was just really painful. And that would have been the time in my life where I would have said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Right? So I this one time in my life where I was like, what did I do? There's more times in my life, but that was one. What did I do, Lord? Why am I going through this? Right? And so I know that David was having a time like that, worse. And what do we say? We go, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And God said to each one of us, I won't forsake you. And then all of us say what? It sure sounds like it, sure feels like it. And every one of you can tell me your stories where it's like it says God won't give me more than I can handle. I can't handle this. I'm at my wit's end, right? That's David. Okay. Now, when you think about that, that's the human condition, right? So you have David saying it 1,000 years before Jesus, but now what happens? You got Jesus saying it. And Jesus says it more profoundly than I said it, or David said it, or you said it, as bad as it gets. It doesn't get as Jesus saying it, see? And so think about that when he says it. Okay? So can somebody read that? Chapter 22.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and am not silent. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. In you our fathers put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions, tearing their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. Is that a pot among a herd? Okay. And my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all of my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. But you, O Lord, be not far off. O my strength, come quickly to help me. Deliver my life from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen.
Okay, we'll stop right there, okay? Now go to Isaiah 53. You have an image of Jesus, don't you? You know David's the one saying it. Now go to Isaiah 53. Can somebody read from verse 1 there? I remember what a potsherd is, and I can't remember. Does anybody remember what a potsherd is?
It's a clay pot.
Clay pot. Okay, that's what I kind of thought. That it was a dry one, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay. And somebody, please.
Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions.
He was pierced for our transgressions. I know yours says that, but he was pierced for our transgressions. Go ahead.
He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shearers silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge.
Isn't that beautiful? Out of the anguish of his soul he will be satisfied. That's beautiful. Right?
By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide his spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors.
We read those two things about a week ago with the 8th graders who were going over this. Part of their assignment was to find where in those two were all the different prophecies fulfilled. When you look at the crucifixion of Jesus, there's tons of them, right? Okay, I thought we needed to read that because in the New Testament they just say what? He was crucified, right? What happens in crucifixion? You guys ever have a demonstration of what happens in crucifixion? Right? 3 points of entry, 1 in the feet, 2 in what I would suggest would be the wrist, was part of the hands, that's what holds the person up. Impalement was its history. They used to impale people, but the Romans took crucifixion and they perfected it, so that there would be maximum suffering happening, right? So when you have this kind of a thing going on, and you have the weight of your body, you're always up against the weight of your body, and you're always also against the weight of your ability to breathe. So you have piercings going on in the most sensitive parts of your body, so that there's excruciating pain, and normally the gravity will push your body down, right? And in that situation up on a cross, you can't breathe well. So what must you do to breathe? You have to push yourself up on the 3 parts of entry with excruciating pain. So it'll be something like this. Push up and come down again to relieve yourself of pain, but you don't relieve yourself of the pain because you can't breathe again. So you're going from one type of pain to another. All right? And the Romans also would decide to take the vertical beam and take their axe and rough it up for you so that at the same time the back would be, I don't know if they necessarily did this with Jesus, but it's very possible. So that would be happening at the same time when you're going up and down. It was just, what the Romans did was to perfect crucifixion to the point where it was just totally excruciating. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I've seen some pictures where the other people crucified Jesus, the 2 on either side.
See, I'm sorry, I missed that.
I've seen pictures where the 2 on either side were tied and not nailed.
Yeah, and that's the artist, even in the, I think they got it wrong again with Mel Gibson. They've done tests on dead bodies. We call a dead body
Corpse?
corpse, but is another term for it. Anyway, they took dead bodies and they actually tried it. When they put nails here, what would happen? It would rip through. Yeah. These bones are not strong enough. This bone is. So I would suggest, unless maybe they did tie them here and then put a nail through here. I don't think so. I think they put the nail right through there. They put it through here. Number one, you've got very sensitive nerves there, and you've got these bones. These bones will support you.
So anyone crucified would have been nailed.
I would suggest, yeah, sure.
You ever had blood draw from there?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that hurts.
It hurts.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, you start reading the prophecies, and then you just start to Pilate heard this, we're not even there. Am I in the right spot? Verse 8, when Pilate heard this, oh no, we're over here, crucifixion, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So the soldiers took him to charge him with carrying his own cross. They crucified him, and then they had the two insurrectionists on each side. He was in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared, and it read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read the sign. The place where he was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and in Greek. And there's a reason for that. The Aramaic language would have been the language of the people. That would have been the language that Jesus would have spoke, by the way. Not Hebrew, not Greek, but Aramaic. Latin would have been the language of the Roman soldiers. And Greek would have been the language of the political order. Okay, back then there was a lot more languages going around. Greek was the official language, but Latin was, so in other words, he wrote them in those three in order that everybody could understand who was there. If you were part of the political order, you heard it in Greek, you read it in Greek. If you were one of the Roman soldiers, that would have been your language. And if you were a common folk, and you could actually, if you were literate, you could hear it in Aramaic or read it in Aramaic. And the reason why he does it is that's what they would do. They would put the charge that your offense, they would put it on the cross so that you could understand what it is the guy is hanging on that for. And he said, because he's the King of the Jews, right? One of his opposition said what? Okay, he did. Pilate said, he said, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. And Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. That one's up for some speculation too. Some of the things that I read is that Pilate had to have some kind of true offense against him. And so the idea, he had to kind of back the idea of insurrection. And so
That's what I'm wondering, why didn't it say he's an insurrectionist?
well, because that would be, that's an interesting point, actually.
Because that's what would allow him to be executed by the Romans.
It's a good point, but he didn't. He said King of the Jews. So is there anything else going on in Pilate's mind? Now, I always thought that Pilate was like, he wants to stick it to these people. He says, he's your king. I don't care. In fact, I think he's very angry with the Sanhedrin. I've read stuff that suggests differently. That say that they don't necessarily, but I don't know.
Well, the claim of being the king of the Jews would put him up for insurrection. That's not blasphemy. That's going against Rome.
That could be, and that's kind of what I read.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would think that would be that would be his.
It would be the specific act of insurrection.
Specific act, and he wanted to cross his T's and dot his I's.
Right.
Yeah, in case somebody reported in the other direction to Rome that he hung up or he crucified an innocent man.
Exactly. Yes. That is kind of what the common thread of what I've read is that. I've always was of that belief that Pilate wants to still stick with the thing because he's pretty upset now because he knows he got punished. Okay? More support is given to what Gary just said as far as from what I read. Do you want to say something?
I think I kind of read it from a modern perspective, maybe not what Pilate himself is thinking, but people today will say, yes, he was the Jesus of Nazareth. He claimed to be God, King of the Jews.
Right.
But he wasn't actually it.
Right.
But he said that he was, but he wasn't.
Right.
But they would agree, people today would agree, yes, he was a leader. Yes, he was Jesus and he was from Nazareth. And yes, he died on a cross.
Right. So there's a prophetic end to that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's very interesting that what Pilate puts on there, and this is from a theological standpoint, or from the eternal perspective, is that what Pilate puts on there is actually the what?
Truth.
Truth.
Yes.
Yes. So though he may have this kind of idea here that's actually true. So he gets to die for the very reason why. So yeah, that is the ultimate point. Yeah, which I was getting to, but that's excellent. Yeah,
It reminds me of, if you go to Parkview Hospital, they have these, right by the chapel, they have a bunch of quotes from different religious leaders. They have Gandhi and Buddha and Allah and Martin Luther King and all these famous people and leaders. Some are gods, some are not. And they have Jesus of Nazareth and some Bible, I forget which Bible passage. But it says Jesus of Nazareth, which is the modern way of referring to Jesus when you think that he was a nice guy, a good teacher,
exactly.
smart leader, but no more God than Martin Luther King was.
So a pathological liar.
But just
Still
as
a
he was
good
a
guy.
human guy, he had something nice to say.
And he may or may not have been crucified for what he said.
Sure.
It had no significance.
So put him on the same bookshelf as all the other religious leaders. Exactly. Yeah. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. The garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide who will get it. This happened that the scriptures might be fulfilled. They divided my garments amongst them, and they cast lots for my clothing. All right, and that is in Psalm 22. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Of course, John was there too. He's writing this. When Jesus saw his mother there, the disciple whom he loved, that's John, standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, which is John, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. Now, probably at this point, the brothers of Jesus didn't believe him. And so he wanted his mother to be in the hands of John, who was a believer. So he's still trying to take care of mom from the cross. Look at the humanity there. It's something. Later knowing here we go. Later knowing that all was now complete, and so that the scriptures would be fulfilled, he asks, he was thirst. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked the sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of a hyssop plant, and lifted up to Jesus. If you go to, for the sake of time, I'll just let you know if you want to write this down. Go to Exodus 12, verse 22. You'll find that during the time of the Exodus, when God instructed the people to take the lamb's blood that they sacrificed for the Passover and put the lamb's blood on the doorposts, they used hyssop plants to brush that out. Okay? And of course, the whole Passover lamb has everything to do with Jesus. So now with a hyssop plant, they bring in the drink. Isn't that interesting? When he had received the drink, Jesus said, this is my favorite Bible verse of all the Bible here. It is, tetelestai, it is finished, or it is accomplished. That's my favorite verse. This is when Jesus says, in other words, this is not for naught, right? And now that he's about to die, he says, it's finished, it's accomplished, God's will is done, and nobody can take it away from you. Always remember that, dear friends. Nobody can take it away from you. It is finished. There's no controversy here. With that, he bowed his head and gave up the spirit. Now it was the day of preparation. So in other words, they're still going through the Passover. The Passover meal would have been Thursday, right? But they still are celebrating the Passover over the course of the week. Right? So there's still going to be meals, and they have to get this done. They have to get the body done, and it can't work at starting at 6 o'clock on Friday, because that's the beginning of the Sabbath. Their day was 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock, when the sun goes down, all right? So he would have died around 3 o'clock, and now they have to make haste, right? It was the day of preparation, and the next day was the special Sabbath, because the Jews did not want the body to be left on the cross during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken, because of course if you break the legs, you can't what? Push up, and so you would die of asphyxiation. People on the cross either died of asphyxiation or a heart attack or something like that, because of immense trauma. The bodies to be taken down. The soldiers came, broke the legs of the first, and then the second. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side. This is where John says, "Please believe this. I'm telling you." And out of it came a flow of water and blood, which indicates death. The water's right from a medical standpoint. The blood corpuscles separate from the water, and that indicates death. Am I saying that right? Okay. The man who saw it, in other words, it's me, John, who saw it. I'm giving testimony. It's true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe in my being the witness. These things happened so that the scriptures would be fulfilled. Not a bone was broken. In another scripture, they would look on the one who they pierced. You go to Psalm 34:20, and you'll read that the bones are not to be broken. You go to Numbers chapter 9, verse 12, you'll find the same thing, that the lamb for the Passover, you're not to break the bones. And also in Exodus 12, verse 46. You know what I'm talking? You want to check it out? If you don't believe me, check it out. It's there. The lambs.
We believe you.
Yeah, the lamb, the body is not to be broken. So neither was the fulfillment of the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Isn't that beautiful? So they didn't have to break his bone. They pierced his side so they could fulfill another one. They were pierced. Unbelievable. All of that was prophesied, right? And they will look upon him who was pierced. Zechariah 12:10. Let's go there. That's pretty cool. No, better the time. Zechariah 12:10, and also Revelation 1:7. You might think, well, Revelation is the New Testament, but there's a really neat apocryphal thing in Revelation. Let's go to Revelation 1:7. This is not a prophecy per se like the Old Testament, but it's interesting. Who wrote the book of Revelation? John, the same person wrote the book of Revelation, right? Revelation 1:7. There's a prologue, the greeting, and everything. I'm going to go back here, starting a little bit back where it says, "To him who loves us and has freed us from our sins by his blood and has made us the kingdom and priests to serve his God and Father." There's so much there. You take the priests and you can go to the book of Hebrews and elaborate on what that means, that you and I are a priesthood of believers, right? Fulfilling the whole priesthood of the Old Testament, to serve his God and Father. To him be glory and honor and power forever. Remember, amen. Look, he is coming. Now this is eschatology. It's about his second coming. He is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the people on earth will mourn because of him. So shall it be. Amen. So, and that's so beautiful, because John, if you get rid of this premillennial idea, you understand that what John is doing is painting a picture of the Lamb and the Lion at the same time. He who was pierced, and you find the glory of the Lamb of God. That's the point I was trying to make on Sunday. You feel the glory of the Lamb of God, who was a snake, right? So he who was pierced, I was talking with the kids just today, and we were at that point where Jesus is resurrected, and he said, will the marks always be there? It seems like they will. So there will always be an indication of the glory of the sacrifice that God made for them. So in the book of Revelation, you see the same thing when he was pierced, and also when he's coming in his glory. Where do you find God's glory? You find God's glory in the humiliation of Christ as much as you find him in the exaltation of Christ. When he comes again, you'll have the exaltation of Christ coming to you as the lion, the triumph, the winner, the one who defeats death and the devil and sin. But don't ever forget crucifixion. The one who was pierced. That's why we have crucifixes in our churches. And why there are those who would suggest we don't. And I will say, no, because we go through Lent. There's glory in the cross. And if you don't attach yourself to the glory of the cross, and you just have this idea of bypassing it, then when you go through your rough time, you're going to have a hard time understanding why you're going through your rough time. Right? Does that make sense? Amen? Amen. Okay. Later, okay, Joseph of Arimathea. I hope you saw when we were reading, this is also prophesying that a rich man, he will lay in a rich man's tomb. Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate. Joseph of Arimathea is a member of the Sanhedrin who believed Jesus, but he was also scared of the political establishment within the church. Are you afraid of the political establishment in the church? Well, it's always a factor. There's always politics involved everywhere. Later, Joseph asked Pilate for the body. He was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jews, just like Nicodemus. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body. He was accompanied by Nicodemus. Remember, we had him in chapter 3. We talked about him yesterday in church and Saturday. The man who earlier had visited Jesus that night. Nicodemus brought him. So Nicodemus must be a believer now too, right? He's come out of the darkness, remember? He came out of darkness. And Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds, that's amazing. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish customs of burial. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb. This was Joseph's tomb, in which no one had ever been laid, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. They were kind of in haste, right? Let's get him in there before 6 o'clock so we can go and observe the Sabbath day. We'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to which is what we'll talk about next week. Any thoughts or questions?
I'm just thinking of the irony of them burying Jesus and then going to worship.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. Especially those who were they didn't want to go into Pilate's vicinity so that they wouldn't be unclean. They were very concerned about that.
Tradition.
In the midst of Jesus. Yeah. Anybody else?
Maybe you're going to get to it, but, so this is about 6 o'clock on Friday. And it says on the first day of the week, it was still dark. The stone was laid away, so that was Sunday morning.
That would have been Sunday morning, yeah.
But,
Yeah. So the Sabbath would have been Saturday, the seventh day, and then Sunday would be the first day of the week.
So total time in the tomb was maybe 30 hours.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah. It
I always
wasn't-
wondered about that.
Yeah.
3 days is where you get the perception. of
Yes.
3 days.
Yeah, and I've heard the argument even from a guy by the name of Chuck Swindoll, who was pretty interesting theologian to listen to down in Texas, and he said, well, it wasn't 3 full days, so he had the crucifixion, he had the crucifixion on Wednesday, and it was on the third day, so it's not after 72 hours. It's and it always used to bother me as a kid, even I could mathematically, but on the third day. So Friday, late Friday, Saturday,
lot of hymns, I think, mislead us to believe it was 3 full days, but he was 3 days in the tomb. One of my
Yeah.
hymns says that.
Yeah.
He was in the tomb 3 days.
And I think it's our interpretation too, right?
Mhm.
If I say I'll see in 3 days, automatically you're thinking 72 hours and you're counting it out. That's not how they thought. Anybody else? All right, 2 more weeks. Next week we get the resurrection. Unfortunately, we have to talk about the resurrection during Lent, but we do that. Kids have to do the same thing. All right. Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you for our time together and for reminding us of your passion and the glory therein and what you did to save us. Help us to recognize your not only concern but your devotion for us to get us to the kingdom that you created us for. Help us to realize that that is our destination. We're baptized into this wonderful covenant that you've done through the cross. Help us to be humbled by it and to be assured by it